Your Holiness, for this afternoon, which is the last session of this Mind and Life conference here in Dharamsala, we are basically closing the wheel. And I'm going to ask first David Mayer to make a short review of what we have been looking at, of these different parts of the jigsaw puzzle. And then afterwards, we're going to ask the scientists to give a few thoughts about their insights and also ask a few questions in regards to the input that Buddhism could give to their actual research. So please, David.
Should I stay here?
Yeah, that's probably easier.
Well, Your Holiness, presumably we are coming to the end of a long and productive week. Thank you for having us here once again. We hope that you feel like there has been some benefit to come from this meeting, and hopefully that will go into the future. This afternoon we are going to review and extend a variety of ideas that have arisen during the course of the week, and one may think of those as being organized with respect to the so-called wheel of mind. We have covered the topics of contemplative studies, philosophy, phenomenology, and so on. In particular, Anne Treisman has introduced us to the scientific study of attention and the modes of attention, including focused and distributed. She has told us also about how important processing can take place outside of awareness in the absence of attention, and she has talked a bit about the neural mechanisms that enable all of this. Alan Wallace, to complement Anne, has presented us in detail with a variety of Tibetan Buddhist meditation techniques for training the attention, and he has especially emphasized the importance of taking into account not only a third-person scientific perspective, but also a first-person contemplative perspective as we move forward in our science. Rupert Gethin, further complimenting Alan, has told us about the Theravadan Buddhist analysis of these matters and explained to us a variety of mental factors which are relevant for understanding and exploring attention and memory. Subsequently, we moved on to further scientific research, and in particular, Adele Diamond has explained the crucial importance of executive control in children and told us about a number of exciting new training programs developed in the West for improving that. Amishi Jha explained some of her research on mindfulness training and its effects in a variety of interesting populations, including medical students, for the improvement of attention and working memory capacity, which then led from attention and memory per se to a consideration of the relationship between emotion, attention, and memory as described for us by Liz Phelps. And in particular, she pointed out the absolutely crucial role that emotion plays in what happens to attention, drawing attention one place, taking it away from other places, which again re-emphasizes what you have said all along, that emotion is the key aspect to consider here, and that's what in the end we will care most about, and its relationship to compassion. This was exemplified further in the studies reported by Cliff Saran from the Shamata project, this very major study that has been completed that integrates and highlights how emotion and cognition are related to each other, both on a third person's perspective level, but also, again, the first person perspective. And finally, we culminated today with Sean Gallagher, who highlighted and raised our consciousness about the need to consider what is happening not only with the mind, but also the body. And that's basically where we are.
I would like to add yourself that you also made a presentation at the beginning, which actually paraphrased the whole position of psychology and also where the definitions are sitting corresponding to attention and memory and actually the mind. And you also spoke about the task of the mind being able to do different tasks at the same time, but it's always related to a shift of attention. So just to close this bracket. Now, I would like to ask one of the persons to sort of look at the impact that this meeting has had on your understanding, both of your research and also what are the inputs from the Buddhist side that you could sort of see for your research to be relevant. We spoke about, for instance, the role of compassion in the attitude and the behavior, and maybe somebody else has a few questions in this regard. Would you like to start, Liz?
So one question I had is about the Buddhist perspective on the relationship between attention and emotion. And you talked about some emotions, destructive emotions, having a sense of urgency that may have a bigger impact on attention, perhaps than non-destructive emotions, maybe wholesome emotions, such as compassion. But could compassion also have a sense of urgency and attention? Could you cultivate that? So that, essentially, is this under your control in some sense, even shifting where the urgency of emotion impacts attention? And is there anything in the Buddhist teachings about that?
kana ngara kebe kala ya mebu shukchim te tu bana shinji lo jangje bege chilon nang ngara hira mene ya ku keji butsi ko da lamsa mi go pa shukchim te tu ya de tapshe yunas
yang dangu de bene ningji sambe lamsa be lo shukchim be kaso lo zdairi lo shushung se
no
da ena ame bene pugulia ji kaso bege
marde kunjun de kana so kuran ko ko no de jana
ale
묘몽초 로디게디 미버데 숙치하다 인지 초데 미버 도주게데 그거 노인
상당 직들을 대디 코라 미버 치라고 지간 폐지 누구도
너를
닝지 삼바슬라베이나 듬베 직디 배나 심지 사람 미고 닝지 게투도 심지 사람 미고 시단 게투고 와
너를
캐시도 되게 캐셔.
Yes. So perhaps the point that His Holiness was, contrast that His Holiness was drawing is not so much about the kind of, grabbing the attention, difference between, destructive emotion versus constructive emotion like compassion. The contrast that he was drawing is that with relation to destructive emotions like anger or hatred, it seems to be the case that they need some kind of solid target to latch onto. Whereas compassion and other more constructive emotions can have a much more distributed kind of object. So for example, you can generate, even conceptually it makes sense to think of compassion for all beings or the whole world, but you cannot be angry towards all beings or hateful towards all beings. So that is the contrast that His Holiness said he was trying to make.
And the emotionally 배는 싫은 유모제.
그래.
제주다 야 배는 시장다 배는 대자 집이나 싫은 유모제 저기야 말이. 그다 다울 집이 유모디디 폐지 숙체요. 그 내가 당난 장수 고요. 내가 당난 데서 미국 치라고 지금 숙치고 싶어요. 델리 개봐요.
So even within the category of what the Buddhists technically call afflictions or klesha, Within that, again, you can see more effectively oriented and more cognitively oriented types. And the technical term we use is distorted intelligence, which is often serves the basis of forming very strong views about something. It may be completely distorted, but once you have that kind of tendency, that grasping tend to be much stronger. The grasping that they lead to and the clinging they lead to tend to be much stronger if it is grounded in some form of distorted understanding or view, whereas more effectively oriented afflictions like strong attachment or anger, they are very powerful, but the tendency to lead on to a very, kind of strongly held view and intransigent may be less. So again, there is a difference.
So I just want to follow up and point out something from psychological science, which Anne alluded to and also fits in very well with Richie's work on the laterality of emotion, that there's a body of research that shows that when you are in a positive affective state, and this is how the crude way we divide it up in Western psychology, a positive affective state, you have a much broader focus of attention, as Anne described, whereas when you're in a negative affective state, you have a much narrower focus of attention. That's very consistent.
Positive lo kibe namba ta ma kibe namba demede di chen do gala debe namba yobe ga to lo kuyanga ta me debe namba to shukje yodo gala ya shi bu chi mu ba chirajeli ya zedon che that makes sense. Yeah.
Theravada ada shungnane do sombina the Pali tradition on sombina ada tawa ngache ene kaza temin yumo ngache ene tawa delpa che유는 나와 ngache 주시에 걸어 뒤집어도 돼.
So his holiness
just tawa the temin 개바 그듯이 che유도.
So His Holiness just wants to confirm with you, Rupert, about the Theravadan perspective on this, that in the Indo-Tibetan sources, we identify six in the Sanskrit tradition.
In the Sanskrit tradition, not Sanskrit tradition, I don't know.
I think, Your Holiness, for the time being, we have to stick with Indo-Tibetan tradition.
Okay.
So in the Indo-Tibetan tradition, in the sources, we speak of six.
Then, yeah, Indo-Thai tradition 소식이다. Indo-Thai or Indo-Burmese tradition.
So that's Pali, yeah, but in their case,
Thailand and Burma consider 남비주요와 약간kun가.
Indo.
So Indo-Thai Buddhism, Indo-Burmese Buddhism, Indo-Tibetan Buddhism, like that.
Yeah, but they
all come from India.
Yeah, but they have the advantage of having Pali as the primary source, the real source. Whereas in the Tibetan case,
Buddhism also, the Pali.
Yeah, but that's why it's more
Pali
complicated.
is there.
Yeah, but if you say Sanskrit tradition, then you have the Pali left out.
I think at least you see I think 12 or 13 volumes of duation.
The Vinaya text.
Vinaya. All I think come from Pali.
So His Holiness just wants to confirm with you, Rupert, that in the Tibetan sources we have 6 root afflictions.
Sanskrit traditions in
Indo-Tibetans, I mean, Indo-Thai,
내들 쿵데 약하랑.
콩대 갸가라는데 이네 코나도 내된 데바 장장이자 데려받아 슬랍되고 싶어요. 맞아?
But Indo-Tibetan can include Theravada. That's what I'm saying.
It can.
Because it grew in India and then spread elsewhere.
Anyway, whatever it is, I
think it is quite sort of
important point.
So eventually, I think we need some sort of definition or
more accurate kind of characterization, terminology.
So according now Pali tradition or Theravada
tradition. His Holiness's question is that there is this recognition of 6 root afflictions, and out of which 5 are non-view, and 1 is the view type, drishti or diti. And so within that we have 5 subcategories. So altogether there are 10. So His Holiness is wondering whether that list is similar in the Theravada tradition. So you have the 6 root afflictions, out of which...
지라시아도 셔모.
요말에 군저 요말에.
요말에.
지라시아도 좀부터 더 자게를 맡아서 요거로 요말에. 자나게로. Mahavibhasha doesn't exist in Pali, does it?
No.
No, 요말에. No.
You have to remind me what the geshes will have to remind me, yes.
So
what
you
the
have
6 are. Drishti is one of the 6.
Drishti is the... So if you have attachment or whatever, loha, aversion or anger, and delusion or moha, and then arrogance or pride or conceitedness,
mana.
And then doubt, afflicted doubt, and then the view.
Yeah.
So these are the 6 root afflictions, and within the drishti, there are 5 of them.
5 of them are considered part of drishti, you mean? So
yeah, 5
that's
sub.
correct.
Yeah.
So
So it includes, I don't know the Sanskrit terms, but for example, you have, say attachment, aversion, delusion or ignorance, pride or conceitedness, and then afflicted doubt, and then view. Afflicted doubt and view. So these are the 6.
I mean, I think in simple terms, it is very similar. But the same words and terminology is used. But I think the subtle dynamics of these 6 may be slightly different.
Yeah.
It would need kind of experts from Theravada Abhidhamma side. And is this Abhidharma Samuchaya or we're not?
Both.
Okay,
same. It's the same. Yeah.
Yeah. It would need more discussion, but there's a lot of common ground.
So the main question is that is the view which is listed in the 6 afflictions, is it understood to be an afflicted form of intelligence?
No, there is a different there. Drishti,
the sixth
one.
Oh, sixth
one. Yeah.
Drishti or ditti in Pali is understood to be an aspect of not so much intelligence, or it's an aspect of lobha. It's when you grasp your view of the world. It's when you... So, as His Holiness said the other day, you can... There are certain wrong views that you grasp, which are very... if you have the view that it is right to kill people, this is a very bad view to grasp hold of. But in a more subtle way, you can even grasp Buddhism as a view. So even wholesome, good views, if you become too attached to them. So Theravada Buddhism treats ditti as an aspect of attachment.
Mathieu?
Just to emphasize on what Izone said about some emotion having an immediate and urgency aspect, some long-lasting. Izone also made a point about attuned or not to reality, that maybe we just say one word. The reason why those who burst all of a sudden, like anger or obsession, they have a tendency linked with attention to distort reality and see something as 100% desirable or 100% despicable. And so therefore they are at odds with reality, and they are also short-lasting. Now compassion, of course, is in the longer term, all those constructive emotions, and at the same time they are based on reality, recognizing interdependence, recognizing the aspiration of every sentient beings to be happy and so forth. So it's also linked with attention, because the proper attention ascertains reality, and when destructive emotions come in the picture, obscuring emotion, they distort reality So that mixture happens.
Want to respond to that, and then we pass on to...
I was just briefly, I don't want to continue, I know we have lots of questions to get to, but to say, I think that's very similar to the psychological research on perspective, which can have a profound impact. I mean, and this is sort of another form of what we might call emotion regulation, the perspective that you come at a situation with, not just after you encounter the stimulus and have to change your response, but the perspective that you approach the situation with can have a profound impact on the subsequent emotional response and the attentional processes and a whole stream of cognitive functions down the road.
근데 디지 조금 있었는데 뇽몽 다디안데 페이지 또 오메슈나네 안다 오메슈나냐 송다 제베이나 뇽몽 기직지 인신제라 수미 이직 남도 냐리야 소이 때 쳐버렸다 수미 이직 남도 참 비슷하다 뇽몽라 다 로테미준디 드리드자네 뇽몽이나 록시 비켜봐 로테미디 비켜봤다 다 태좀 뇽몽전스라고 이나야 페이지 태좀 뇽몽전스잖아요 대미juk 태종가 페이지 조금 그봐 자 드리드자네 뇽몽전게 로라 치로 다 도바임베 다 로임베 페이지 켜버래 디 전식이 로라 인심이 수미직 남도 깨고 말해 다 대바다 인지사도 잘라 수미직 남도 정도 와 디켜봐요 제가 여러분 제가 여러봐 제가 연구를 봐 젠이 대바게야 젠이 인지디야 연구를 봐 독수 젠데 독수 대부도 용 여서 연구계를 용 초그래디 이제 수미직 남도 못 와. 더 하셔도 못 와. 디켜봐지요.
So one important distinction that is drawn in the
that destructive emotion, not wholesome,
wholesome and unwholesome emotions. One distinction that is drawn is to take partly on what Matthew was pointing out, and this is primarily from the perspective of the middle way philosophy school. Particularly in the writings of Nagarjuna, there is an understanding that all forms of afflictions, mental afflictions, that arise as a result of some initial kind of distorted application of attention, attending to some distorted characteristics, and so therefore these afflictions are by their very nature distorted in relation to reality. Whereas if you contrast them to more wholesome mental states like faith and trust and and wisdom and compassion and so on, then although in the arising of these more wholesome states of mind, some form of kind of interpretation, evaluation may occur. In fact, the application of the two faculties that Rupert was talking about. So, so having said that, it's also having second thoughts about the question of faith and trust, confidence, because it can be grounded in some form of distorted understanding of reality. But generally, these wholesome mental states and emotion may involve, in their arising, some form of evaluative processes, application of the two faculties, vitakka and vichara, initial application and more refined application, analysis. However, they are more in tune with reality. There is no attending to the distorted characteristics of reality. So these, the emotions themselves do not have this afflicted, distorted component. So it's a very complicated question, partly because in the Buddhist tradition, depending upon what perspective or philosophical standpoint you adopt, what may seem to be a veridical state of mind in one context need not necessarily be veridical from the perspective of another understanding of reality. So it's a very complicated point.
Cliff, please.
Sure. Your Holiness, I want to return to the first observation that Liz made just now, suggesting that when you feel happier, you have a broader attention. I want to kind of turn that on its head and ask the following question. As you cultivate one-pointed attention, there is a narrowing of attention, and is a possible characterized difficulty or side effect of the cultivation of shamatha, feeling more depressed. We know that if you feel bad and you smile, you feel better. In the context of embodiment, is it possible that when you narrow your attention, an aspect of your emotions also narrows? Is this a pitfall? I'm concerned about difficulties Westerners have in approaching this practice intensely, but they're not doing it in the context of all of the teachings. We talk about this as a contemplative technology requiring no belief. On the other hand, without a very large sense of motivation and the nature of your mind, you might focus, and then you might find you're stuck. So is there characteristic, are there teachings about warding off or counteracting this?
His Holiness has asked me to respond. I didn't make a move, so. 3 elements come to mind. Just in case that had happened, I prepared. 3 cases come to mind, and that is in classical teachings when you're drawing your awareness very much inwards, whether in shamatha or other very concentrated practices such as vajrayana. There's a lot of encouragement to, in between sessions, to come out and let your awareness be very expansive. So big sky, big view, and so let your mind become very kuyambo, it's very spacious in between sessions. This is very helpful. I'm translating now. Very helpful for overcoming laxity. And laxity, the term has a quality of sinking, which can lead to depression and a narrowing of the mind. So that's one point. Complementing your shamatha practice with practices such as the 4 immeasurables, which don't require any belief system. Once again, a great quality of spaciousness comes up. And thirdly, and I'm finished, is especially for us living in the modern world, to really let your practice be rooted in a sense of spaciousness, of relaxation, of looseness, and not come in as a hard-driving Westerner or modern person got to achieve shamatha or bust, and then sit down and strive really diligently. I know what that's like. I've done it. It doesn't work.
Now, there is in fact an instruction. One of the forces that needs to be applied in the context of, in the process of shamatha training, is an ability to let go. So this is the passage that His Holiness just cited is in Shantideva's chapter on joyful perseverance, or virya. And here he says that one should be able to let go when necessary. So in the process of practicing, if you really feel wearied and exhausted, then you really have to let go and stop.
근데 젊은 시간도 송샤들이 가서 되게 덜에 떠서 다 디크돌도 말이지 가서 튼 야고 연배 그돌을 인 샤고레스 셴 디자는 이 침머를 양 꿈닝들스 되면은 튕기 매트르즈네 쭉 놀러요 그래서
And this is here what Tsongkhapa has said is very true, which is partly in relation to this point Shantideva is making. His advice is that for meditators to end the session while it is on a high, when it's going well, so that when you return to your cushion, you will have a sense of joy and willingness to do it again. Whereas if you keep it too late and then you are exhausted and you become then next time when you even see your cushion, you might feel kind of apprehensive and feeling yuck.
Mishi, please.
That's a perfect lead-in to my question, which is, during my presentation, Your Holiness, you mentioned that laxity and dullness are things that could happen, and the quality of this dimension of laxity and dullness could impact the nature of the results that I found. And then we were just speaking about exhaustion. And I wanted to ask you what you think are there any insights from the Buddhist perspective on what causes fatigue? What gets fatigued?
Some number to be getting township on the cover. That Luke Joe Tuni. A deed that township in group. Suddenly you go, yes, your question, catch me one. And because Christian jury, Magongi Kawayadova. That better get on the Ninguyuni, Kalamasa, Congested,
So here, to some extent, we had this discussion earlier. His Holiness was saying that he made the point about the differences in the quality of mind or state of mind between early morning and late afternoon or evening. So when we talk about fatigue or exhaustion, there could be both physical level causes and conditions, but also mental level forces and conditions. For example, sometimes just habitual thought patterns and a lot of thinking might lead to a lot of exhaustion. And similarly, one's physical state can lead to exhaustion. That's why it's very important to be able to relax and sometimes just simply stop doing meditation and take off, kind of let go. So, for example, for the monastic members, fully ordained monks do not eat solid meals after lunch. And that is because the state of the body affects the state of your mind. And the idea here is not to have a heaviness in your body. So for that, you don't eat solid meals after lunch. So these days, of course, given the interest in the diet, this practice may also be an important, beneficial kind of diet practice.
It should do that. They have a loosen your nang and such. Get all of Colmus. Does it test it is a marvel. Ranging it does some compassion champuchen under the Xinjiang King Luzane. Any Galilean losing nang and it all soap. That you need dear, young Corimbo Chigre Mado, Zawa, Maranzo.
Basically, there is a certain dysfunctional tendencies that are very natural to the human condition that makes one's mind and body vulnerable to exhaustions, fatigue, and so on. And so these tendencies are thought to be overcome only at a more advanced state of meditative achievement. For example, in the Shamata context, we speak of physical and mental pliancy. What was prashapti, the pliance, Xinjiang. So, only then one begins to address these very natural, kind of dysfunctional tendencies, or how do you translate?
What, nengele?
Nengele.
Yeah, dysfunctional mind or dysfunctional tendencies.
Tendencies.
Yeah.
So, and then, and from the Buddhist point of view, the understanding of this is that this is the very fact of our existence as a conditioned being. We have these tendencies, and through meditation, one can begin to, gradually, free ourselves from these very strong habitual dysfunctional tendencies.
I just wanted to ask it directly back about this. One of the things that cognitive neuroscience has found recently is this fatigue, this mental fatigue, or what we'd call a depletion, a reduction in self-control over time, is thought to be tied to fatigue in monitoring our own behavior. So I'm wondering if in practices like advanced practice,
단디 구조단의 공적 사이언스 그전 다시 제백을 yapena 이 미부질 때제 지도걸은 가로진다 미부질 때야디 니부 중두고 봐 이당으로 제제 다디 제디 김전답 제바 제백을야 시진기 잘하세 니부디 마당 맞지 고냠배 경기 되는 건데
시진기 잘하인로 전배 민는 고 제대로
so it's
전배 숨고도
so it's it's unclear whether that's because the mindfulness faculty is not able to sustain the attention, or whether it is a function of the weakening of the monitoring faculty.
미국 쇼도 서로다. 근데 그 제가 정해지 봐도 싸 그게 미팅 강로 샤야 돼 temperature.
So because the role of samprajñana, which is translated as clear comprehension in the Theravada sources, but we translate it as meta-awareness or meta-cognition.
Yes, meta-cognition. Good.
So that the role of that faculty is seen to be more of a monitoring one's own mental and physical states to see, for example, if you are in the context of a meditation, to see whether you have lost your attention or not. But it is the faculty of mindfulness whose role is to sustain that attention. So
to sustain the samprajñana?
No.
To sustain your attention on the object of your practice.
Object. Attention we're translating as manisakara.
Matthew, you had
yes, about the fatigue of attention. There's quite a nice testimony. In part of the study that's been done on attention and this continuous performance task of the same kind that with the short and long lines. Now there's one with numbers, and you have to press when there's a 0, and they flash quite fast. So from the Princeton group, we sent some laptops in people who were doing 3 years retreat, and among them there were 3 subjects who for 45 minutes had a complete accuracy. They didn't make a single mistake in 1,000 pushing. And at the end they said, shall we go on? And they said the first 5 minutes was a little bit difficult to get in the flow in a way of attention, but then they were just continuing in a very relaxed manner, yet undistracted. So that's quite interesting. And then a small thing I wanted to say about the fact of how the sorry, I forgot the point.
Maybe Alan.
Lack of mindfulness. Just lapse of mindfulness. I'm just saying.
Alan,
during this conversation, just this afternoon, a research project came to mind that might be useful. And I want to give an analogy first in traditional Buddhist practice. When you're cultivating upeksha, the impartiality towards sentient beings, in other words, instead of having craving for the one loved one, hostility for this one, and indifference for the neutral person, then one cultivates an equal caring for all sentient beings. But one of the strategies for doing this is actually bringing vividly to mind a person for whom one has a lot of attachment, and actually in this controlled experiment, allowing the attachment to arise, seeing the effect on one's body-mind, and then moving to the person one doesn't like, allowing the anger to arise, the hostility, aversion, reflecting on the person's negative qualities, going to the negative person, allowing a sense of indifference to arise. So letting these 3 mental afflictions come up, and then moving beyond them, shifting the perspective, and seeing they're all sentient beings like me, all equally deserving of compassion. Taking that as a model that we actually in practice will allow sometimes, in a controlled circumstance, these kleshas to arise. What I think would be fascinating scientifically would be to give people now, to operationalize this, give people stimuli that are likely to arouse craving, the mental affliction of craving attachment, give them stimuli that we intend to arouse in this controlled setting, aversion, hostility, the mental affliction, and likewise just an indifference, kind of I don't care, and then see, having aroused this, what is the effect on the body? What is the effect on the mind? You just ask them, questionnaire or whatever you want to do, but what is the effect when these mental afflictions arise? And the term klesha has a dual connotation. One is it afflicts. It makes you suffer. In the body, in the mind, it afflicts, but it also has a connotation of klishta, which means to distort. And as Holiness just commented just a few minutes ago, that every mental affliction is rooted in a misperception, a misapprehension of reality. If it's not rooted in a misapprehension of reality, it's not a mental affliction. It might even look like it. One might display ferocious behavior and think, oh, that person is so hostile. But if it's not rooted in a misapprehension, it may be rooted in wisdom, and this could be a ferocious form of compassion. But this would be fascinating, I think, both from a clinical psychology, to see is it good for you or not to manifest, to experience mental afflictions, but also in terms of cognitive psychology, simply understanding the nature of these, and then we'd move beyond simply positive and negative affect and bring in a quality that really has to do with our well-being, which could be very interesting. So that's one research project that might be interesting.
So my mindfulness came back.
Yeah.
And it's about the training question that you raised. And John has mentioned that destructive emotion don't need training. You don't need a booster for anger, an amplifier for jealousy. We have that. Now, at the same time, for compassion, why it takes a long time? Because we have compassionate thoughts, but they're soon replaced by some other thoughts. So in the same way that we don't learn the piano by tapping with 2 fingers 15 seconds every 2 weeks, so those needs training, unless the destructive ones, which come out of the blue, are not grounded in reality. So that's also the difference in matter of training or not requiring training.
Adele, your question?
Yes. I'm particularly interested in practical applications. So I'm thinking that in psychotherapy, we know that often if you take a mentally ill person out of the family and you work with them for some time in some other venue, you can do a lot of healing. But you put them back in the dysfunctional family, and a lot of the good that you did gets undone. For trying to train mental compassion and mental discipline, we often have people go on retreats, or people from other traditions might have people go in the wilderness and do, and you get remarkable gains there, but then people go back to their regular lives. And I'm wondering if the retreats might need a complement of working also with the world that the person is going back to, and what that might look like and what you might do. Also, we tend to focus on the student, and the students, what can we do with the students to teach them meditative practice or help them learn compassion? But I think we also need to work with their teachers, because if their teachers are stressed, if their teachers are afflicted, then that's going to affect the students no matter what we're trying to teach them. And I had one final question.
Let's answer these two. You can think about it, and then we come back to them.
다 대패만 쇼로. 다 콘냠샤 걸리야. 참바다. 지다 인지다. 인도스야. 로 슈그루지야나. 미라고 거면하고. 다음에 거면하고. 근데 냠샤가 내걸이야. 거제기 네바체 장배 최기 디지루고 제도 걸 때도 딱 경에 차이인데 미다버는 신다야. 다음에 버는 신다야. 동에 버는 신다니. 아니 차다 맞이야지. 들어다.
In fact, you're raising, to address this very point, in the Buddhist text, we speak of periods during the formal sitting sessions, meditative sessions.
Buddhist text was Buddhist practice.
In Buddhist practice, we speak of a distinction between the formal sitting sessions and the post-meditational periods. And His Holiness was saying that as he sees it, actually, the purpose of the meditation is not just to attain certain states of mind during the formal sitting, but rather be able to apply what one has realized in the real world, in your day-to-day interaction with the world. And because in the post-meditational period, we are, in a sense, living in the real world, where we are confronted with everyday situations and objects that generally tend to lead to all sorts of reactions and afflictions on our part. So therefore, if the person who is doing formal sitting meditation is cultivating compassion, loving kindness, and those who have greater mental facility, maybe meditating upon anitya, impermanence, or no self, anatta, and emptiness, and so on, then the idea is for this person to somehow retain the experience, the tone of that experience in the form of a kind of a glue, like adhesive quality that will somehow kind of give a texture to the whole post-meditational period experience, so that when he or she confronts with adversity that may normally give rise to angry reaction on your part or sadness and so on, you are able to handle these situations with an awareness of bringing the awareness of impermanence, bringing the awareness of no self, and bringing the awareness of emptiness and so on.
Thank you. I remembered my last question. Sorry. And Alan's comment reminded me of it. I'm wondering if there's an analogy to what I'm going to say in Buddhist practice, and if not, if this is at all useful to think about in the context of Buddhist practice. Neuroscientist Amir Raz asked children with Tourette's, which is a disorder, with severe tics. Tics can be involuntarily cursing all the time or moving in ways you don't mean to move. That's what's called a tic. And he asked children with severe tics to try not to tic for 5 minutes. It's very hard, especially because now they're thinking about ticking. And after 5 minutes, they tic like crazy, as if they were holding it in and it's got to come out. Then he told the children, I have a special machine that will take your tics away. You don't have to try not to tic. My machine will do it. And for as long as he has looked, for up to several hours, they didn't tic, and they showed no excess tics after. Now, of course, they did it. So it's the difference between intentionally trying and relaxing. And I'm wondering if there's an analogy in Buddhist practice, or if this is at all useful to think about in the context of Buddhist practice.
Delia di tablia kiranto ke chegu mares nganzo machine juice machine ding kiran di che da gagres lapshana and then diringa tuzu gazun go bine buzu zane di zagas ke che da map chagores parsha ja de gite
machine ke yomar ba
machine de yomar da ko lapshana dis da ko lok yi de tol chedo nin degi menza kul로 해보 자제 da di 연구 요원자 da didan 팀버든데 낭병원에
Did you go home? Said it. Go ahead. Go. Zindame megom. Ben the sushi king will come with things. Ben the megom. Go shene 그 강한 떡이야 뭐.
나래.
저거 록시만 왔다. 꼭 거기 좀 생각 더 하네. 검셔시. 들으면서 들어서 처음으로.
So there are
로바지
there are somewhat similar meditation practices in the Buddhist tradition where for a specific purpose in a particular context you conjure an image and which may not be reflect the reality, but for a specific purpose you conjure that image and direct your attention towards it. So for example, in the Vajrayana meditation, you deliberately cultivate the identity and image of yourself as a deity, enlightened being. Similarly, in other forms of meditation may involve, creating the image of the entire face of the earth being filled with skeletons.
Pali tradition also.
This must be the same in the Pali tradition. So although this does not... And then there is the meditation on the impurity of the body and so on. So these are, that deliberately conjured images which become the focus of your meditation, and then it has a tendency to help in other directions. So, but it does not reflect reality, of course.
I was wondering something more, like when I have tried analytical meditation of loving kindness, and I get stuck on trying to do loving kindness towards somebody who I think has done terrible wrongs. So I'm wondering if I imagined that I didn't have to try to do that, but there was a magic machine that would enable me to show loving kindness. If there was some way, because when I try in meditation, I get stuck. And if there's any notion of not trying and then succeeding.
세메시나 참바권 백업이야. 니수수 나오면서 미질이 미도니는 체도 닌 우수접지 당한지고는 도접되기도스. 다디양고 단디 부디 남신 여번한 신지. 야지 응어스 맞제바 균에. 답시로 비어베스.
아주 잘한다.
So we have to look for one.
I think we have one. I think we have one.
It would be wonderful if we can find one.
I think we have one. You take a prayer wheel and you go like this, and you recite Om Mani Padme Hum. And you just do that a whole lot. Definitely that will help.
Fingers.
Mo gengo tende shibush pengudo. Mo gengo yoro, konza teba yoro, konza kalesa na mani college, and mani 전 konza nambe chushira shingi yomaro. Yiri semla shira pengudo. Teba korange wong. Ane never yoro, kora missing tela, tebe wongi, any tick yoro, di never cha. Tabo do. There is such a machine. It's called a prayer wheel. And a magical sound, it's called a mantra, Om Mani Padme Hum. And if you turn, you have to follow the directions. You spin the prayer wheel in a clockwise direction, very important. And you take in the left hand the mantra, the mala has to have 108 beads, very important. And you say Om Mani Padme Hum. And then you recite that a lot. Even if you have no understanding, if you place your trust in this, definitely helps. And we have a lot of experience of old Tibetan women who will come here for decades now. They're doing this.
Not only women.
But especially. They're the ones that caught my attention. Anybody it works. And you watch the effect on the mind. Definitely helps. So that's our machine.
Matthew, you have another machine?
Well, there's a similar thing about thoughts. You can't do it and you relax, it works. Well, if you try to stop, to block the stream of thoughts, you're a loser. We say we cannot stop a powerful spring from the meadow. So since this is hopeless, you just let them go. But it's a difference, just let them go and disappear, or letting them multiply. So there's also a skillful means. Now about compassion, if I may say, this is also based on reasoning. If you can't feel compassion for someone who's very nasty, to love with compassion is not to like. You don't have to like a dictator. But loving him in that case is to wish that anger, hatred, cruelty that is at person's mind may disappear. That's the Buddhist compassion. It's not say, give him a ticket to have a nice time in the Bahamas.
interpret. You wanted to add something in regards to what was said from the Theravada side?
Well, it's just that there's a well-known story of Ananda, when they needed Ananda, because at the first Buddhist council, because he was the one who had heard all the Buddha's teachings. But Ananda was not an arahat, he was not enlightened. So they said they needed 500 arahats, they had 499. So they said, Ananda, you need to go and get enlightened. And Ananda went out and tried to practice, and he came back and said, I can't do it. And so they told him, you've got to get enlightened. And he tried to do it. And then in the end he just said, okay, if Ananda should not be enlightened, then he will not be enlightened. I give up. And then it said as he lay down to sleep, he became enlightened.
In So there's a similar account in the Vinaya, the monastic disciplinary text in the Tibetan canon, where, in fact, the story is slightly more detailed. In fact, it's the congregation of monks who listed 8 faults of Ananda and, in fact, expelled him. And that was partly because Ananda had a problem with the pride. First of all, he was related to the Buddha. And secondly, he was the principal attendant. So because of these, he had a sense of pride that somehow he was special. And this was coming in the way of his attainment of liberation, because in order to attain liberation, you have to overcome all the root afflictions. So the monastic congregation expelled him. And especially Kashyapa. And then that led to a great degree of humility on Ananda's part, which then opened him to the attainment of liberation. Yeah.
Anne, would you like to ask a question?
Diego was asking me to
Yeah.
to raise questions, and I think the main one that came out of my talk, out of the evidence that I described there, is are there any implications for the Buddhist theory of the evidence that a large portion of mental processing seems to go below the level of awareness? We're not conscious of it. So I mentioned some experiments, and there are lots of them, showing that behavior is often influenced by unconscious cues in the environment, so the dollar bills, for example. There's evidence that different mental functions can be going on in parallel, so that, for example, the hands can know one thing which is not available for verbal report. So I was interested in is there a distinction between the unconscious processes that could be brought into awareness through meditation and those that could not? And I think my suggestion would be that maybe the dollar bills, yes, you could become aware of some of these cues that are influencing you. Things like binding, the process of binding features, probably not. Access to the retinal image, the really sensory form of the stimulus, also probably not. So I was wondering if you had any comments on that kind of division.
Morangi kasanya Malaysia shube kaple ani sheba kebe kaple ya rigma buch rimba kala kanzam chipado kansa korana ngoto majuba. And then shebong chip one share gechi you then the tongo to something chiki. Now shagurva. The male kolia korimba kala kanzam chip chama subconscious processes. Kanta kansa korana ngoto majube to tus. And pejon kashi pejon buyores chitipena dollar bilji zaje shaje and the chebekali Musmatone Casati make Surkutombe gang, you can stay over. The deity peje, Lo Changbaina, and Chisambuya, then Lonor Chinje, the you can take you on your egg, Chetu egg, Zero Meadows. I am been one share of Skitchike, Chebekabia, Toma, than the retinagal, Parjaura, Parta, Parja King, Tenesu, one share make it Sumaton, only a remember which Kalakan to go to Lebanon. The kitty page, Lo Janeke, need to go ayus, when the Chetuga ayus, the Kandachitan and June, and the Kandakasa Tandamundo Majubene, Loy that remember secure and the Kasus to Juta, Kizionas, and Chita, no, Tanda Kansakuran to Jumato with the day. That Loy, that Jolu in a Datu Takanda, Tandamundo Majurmatu, you go to Juta with the written day, Rebello Jane. The Yuna and Chitana want to give it a Majubegi, remitted the Munzinchi Yunas. Yemji thank Yunas.
Lord John, the Georgia University, and ambition to the Shaggy. No, the Shaggy. Then other when you go to see the go to Zadi, Maranzo, Lord Tame, but they want to see the Shiva Mato. Lawyer Chang is any go to the Shang, Lord never should show to the young digger. The Shinto go to Mangusian Katrina. She did Mama to Katrina.
Generally, there is, in the Buddhist epistemology, there is an understanding that what may remain hidden and obscure to an individual person at a given time, given stage, may in fact become more evident later on as a result of one's training the mind. So there is a understanding among the facts of the world, one can say that those are some are which are evident facts, which the person can consciously understand and perceive. Then some may be slightly hidden facts, which may remain, which may need to be inferred, and then some are categorized as extremely hidden facts. So, and these distinctions are really drawn from the perspective of a particular individual. What may be hidden to one individual may not be hidden to another person. So what may be evident to one person may not be evident to another person. So given this, there is an understanding that what may be opaque at any given moment may, through cultivation of the mental faculties, become more and more evident. So that is that general position.
But I'm also lojo majikonli ABCD mashibe mongoshtoba. 다 갈래갈래 로로로로진의 로정은 이슈선 로조 체인도잖아요. 말 마시베 참 먹고 싶으시다 매우 차체. 대시에 살리기로. 장으로. 장좀.
So even if you look at the whole education process, we may begin with a total, in ignorance of what the alphabet stand for, and then gradually over many years we go through the education. So we, in a sense, are removing, one could call it ignorance or unknowing in relation to aspects of unknowing in relation to facts and the world. So every time you have a new knowledge, you're removing an aspect of an unknowing. So this is, in a sense, a process in the mind and change taking place in the mind.
Yeah, there's certainly many examples of that. I mean, at the moment, when you speak in Tibetan, it sounds like gibberish to me. I don't understand anything. But if I took the time to learn Tibetan, I would not be able to avoid understanding it. It would just automatically become available. But what's kind of a little more worrying to me is that we can be influenced by so many things in the environment without realizing it. So another thing, for example, there was an experiment in which women were asked to choose a pair of stockings from 4 that were in front of them. They were all identical, actually, but the majority of subjects chose the one on the right. When they were asked why, not one of them said because it was on the right. They said, it's more silky, it's better color, all kinds of things like this, which were not based on fact.
David, you would like to ask a question?
It seems like a general theme that has been running through this afternoon's session is the idea that one first works very, very hard and concentrates on some aspect of reality, but then in order to make progress, one must let go and expand, and if need be, after a rest, come back and do it all again. So the question would then be, how do you know when you have done enough work so that it is time to let go? And more generally, could you talk about all of this, please, in the context of Madhyamaka and the middle way? Because, in effect, this, at least to me, seems like a way in which the middle way becomes manifest in practice.
So Diego is the person who's determining when to stop and when not to stop.
I set the boundaries. That's Tsam. That's retreat.
There's an example in the sutra of a Veena master, who's a string instrument from India, who was also a disciple of the Buddha, and came to him and said, my meditation is impossible. Sometimes I'm so tense, and sometimes I fall completely in laxity. And then the Buddha said, bring your instrument, and now you should tune it in front of me. How do you tune the strings? And so he said, well, I should tune it so that it's right, harmonious sound. If it's too much, they'll break. If it's too loose, the sound will not be good. So he said, Buddha said, just do like that. When it becomes too tense, you relax. When it's too relaxed, you revive your mindfulness.
Well, this is really good. This is really good, but would you now please expound on that more generally with respect to Madhyamaka in the middle way?
I'd like to bring this back to His Holiness on that point, and also relate it to Anne. Because Anne brought to our attention early on that all of our experiences are saturated by concepts. But in our later conversation, you also commented that it's not just the equal level. Sometimes it's very conceptual, sometimes less so. So a gradient. And so, and then relating this to David's point with the Madhyamaka, I would like to pose a question to Your Holiness. And that is, in the Madhyamaka view, it is said that every object that we identify, the computer screen, glass, anything, all exist independent upon conceptual designation. Right? So this would imply that our apprehension of every object must be related to conceptual designation. It's also true that in addition to conceptual designation, we may reify. And then on the dependence on that, then all mental afflictions arise. So could Your Holiness please explain to us what is meant by conceptualization or conceptual designation here in relevance very much to Anne's comment, and then we come back to David also, where is the middle way? It's a very large topic, short time, but I think very important. I think that'll be good for starters.
Okay. 동해 시를 잡고 버리디 이내 동해 사디 낭좀 대 뭐지 버잖아 시를 자 동해 야마리스 동해를 미비 자질래 송가 야마리스.
So here, in one of the earlier sessions, His Holiness referred to the sutra on the Four Noble Truths, where he presented the teachings of the Four Noble Truths by means of first recounting the nature of the individual truths, and then the functions of the individual truths, and then the results of that knowledge. And so in the last category, with relation to results, although there is one way of interpreting that statement in terms of the knowledge of the cessation and also the unborn nature of phenomena, but there is also so the knowledge of the cessation of suffering, and the knowledge of the absence of origination of the source of suffering. However, there is another way of interpreting this sutra where the understanding is that although suffering is to be recognized, but there is no suffering to be recognized. And although origin of suffering is to be eliminated, but there is no origin of suffering to be eliminated. And the point here is that when we talk about understanding the nature of suffering, if we, being not contented by our understanding of the meaning of suffering within the context of conventional level of description, and move beyond that and seek some kind of true reference to the term suffering and find some kind of essence, a real existence of suffering, then there is no suffering to be found. There is no suffering to be recognized.
저다다 시를 저기 동해지에 여등에 야 시를 잘 매버서지 샤게 되지. 자 능수고 원도 제베이나 den시 담바시 시규에다 달라 방랑 쪽도 시규에다 직체 내주 낭서 대 머스벌 내주 원도 제베이나 담바시 메시교로다 담바시메 양대메 산제메 다에메 샤메스로.
So what we find here is a kind of a paradoxical teaching where Buddha is on the one hand talking about there is something to be there is some kind of suffering to be recognized, but at the same time he's saying there is no suffering to be recognized. Similarly, an origin of suffering to be abandoned, or there is no origin of suffering to be abandoned. So what we find here is a kind of two sets of teachings, or two aspects of teachings, where one, there is a discussion about Four Noble Truths, the suffering, its origin, cessation, and path, each of which has a specific functions. Then another aspect of the teaching is that there are none of these four truths in reality. So what the Buddha is teaching here is that when we talk about these things at the level of everyday experience, at the level of conventional truth, at the level of how we experience and perceive the world, then there are these four truths: suffering, origin, cessation, and the path leading to it. But if we are looking at the ultimate reality of these things, looking for some kind of true essence, then from that perspective, standpoint, then none of these facts exist. There is no suffering, no origin, no cessation, nor path. So he's discussing, he's speaking at these two levels. One at the level of everyday experience and perception, one at the level of ultimate reality. Sorry, and then so the second aspect really resonates what the Heart Sutra talks about. No form, no feelings, no
with respect to emptiness.
Perceptions and so on with respect to emptiness.
So that's the dilido. Down the 가사 저기. 가서 동네 시험을 쳐야다. 구조 방어 쳐야다. 여러 번. 다 디 내주 임시시험 왔을 때 왔을나? 다디 초스도. 네. 다디 다운 아주 로리에 차단데 컨디션도 로리 차단 컨디션도. 차단 달라시베 능주 달라시베 로이 진다 진주 컨디션도. 티 망앙세야 나르즈바 최가도 가는 이나야 델리야 아테근 즈바용야디 zboyonya digi ta logyo mongus di changgi yutu chigi ta chikdo xiao samda bayina 당고 마시다를 생기지 다게 디싱을 차기 버서 대응도 와. 더들이 인도산에 따오 말 좀 봐서다디 매버서야디 나 야마르스나 다 맞으러다. 봐. 나 야래 이내 말 진우디 컨디션스나 안다 녀모 자용네. 로전 자용네. 난 진우디 컨디션스나 낭좀 뭐임 봐. 단지 들루네. 여대번 집부터 제용도.
So one might then raise the question, okay, so there's a level of description of this reality on the conventional everyday level, and then from the ultimate standpoint, none of these exists. So what? So then here, the question is raised, how, when we relate to the world and one's own existence, how do we do so in a naive kind of everyday level? We tend to relate to whether it is suffering or origin or path or cessation. We tend to relate to them, we tend to view them as if each of these possess some kind of intrinsic reality, some kind of reality defined by their own characteristics. So then it is this that serves as the basis for the arising of all sorts of afflictions. So for example, as one text points out, that first the thought I am arises, and then the thought these are mine or mine arises, and from this arises a whole... This is in Chandrakirti's text, entering the middle way, where he says the first thought I am arises, then the thought mine arises, and which then give rise to a whole host of afflicted mental states. So then the question is how... So Dhammakirti makes a similar point where he says that when you make the kind of the conceptual kind of when you have the thought that I exist, then on that basis you make a distinction between self and others, and from this kind of a dichotomy of self and others, then attachment to self and aversion to others arises. So Dhammakirti is making a similar point. So then we ask the question, how do we relate to this sense of self, sense of I am, this thought I am? So if in response to this we say that, well, the self or the I does not exist, then this is a rather silly response, because there is, you are there, you exist. And this negation of, or acceptance of total non-existence of a person or I would be kind of contrary to our everyday experience. Then the question is, how does this I or how does this person exist? So it's not that the thought simply I am or I give rise to the afflictions. It's a particular way of grasping at this I, viewing this I. Similarly, simply making distinction between this thing and that thing is not going to give rise to afflictions, but it's by grasping onto this and attributing to these phenomena a form of existence which is somehow objectively real and independently existing in its own right. That is what leads to grasping and to a whole host of afflictions. So what one needs to find is a kind of a middle way or a balance between a kind of an understanding of the world where we do not undermine the veridicality or validity of everyday conventions which allow us to make distinctions between self and others and the world around us and so on the one hand, because this self and others and all of this distinction is very relevant to one's own existence and condition and sense of well-being as well. Yet at the same time, we do not slide into a form of understanding this world where there is a grasping that leads to distorted mental states and afflictions. So in order to find that middle way, the Madhyamaka, the middle way tradition, speaks of how phenomena existing on the conventional relative level, but not in the ultimate absolute level.
So that would be also...
다들 약속이다. 아들들이 준전되기 강시 깨를 깨봐 대마기. 달라 깨베랑 시게만 시셔야 돼.
So the best in the kind of
타녀도 여체.
나름.
땡은 좋은데. 규진은 좋은데. 규진은 좋은 니기 때문에 라왕 그 매버도 좀.
So here, so this middle way is really beautifully articulated in a verse in the Buddha Sutra, where he says that that which comes into being due to conditions is unborn. Sorry, that which comes into being. So, that which comes into being due to condition is unborn, because for it lacks, for it is devoid of intrinsically real arising. So what the Buddha is stating here is the fact that something comes into being as a result of other conditions is an indication that it does not have a form of arising. It is somehow definable by its own essence.
That's middle way.
But Your Holiness, Buddhism also posits the possibility of non-conceptual awareness. So in your morning practice, when you're analytically investigating emptiness, it's a conceptual process.
Yes.
How is it possible to investigate emptiness conceptually, and that eventually leads to a completely non-conceptual realization of emptiness? How is that possible?
I have no experience.
But it is possible?
Possible, of course possible.
Okay. I just wanted to hear it from your lips.
Because the mind follows after habituation, familiarity. And then if we ask further question, how is it that the mind follows after habituation and familiarity? Then that's the way it is.
Thank you.
That is the 춘이지르고 그래서 자원집이르고 아니 뚜루그르고 엔데나 가르쳐 태버리고 that's it.
So here it's helpful to take into account Buddhist kind of idea of what I refer to as the four principles that are and which serves as an avenue for engaging with reality or analyzing reality. And this is explicitly developed and more systematically developed in the writing of Asanga, where he talks about the principle of nature, which is somewhat analogous to the laws of physics, but principle of nature, and then principle of function, and then principle of dependence. And taking these three principles as a basis, then you apply the principle of evidence. If A, then B, and so on. So these really serve, these four principles serve as an avenue through which you can investigate the reality. So many of the facts we find in the world are really what belongs to the category of principle of nature. That's the way it is. So why consciousness in the Buddhist understanding has this quality of luminosity? That's the way it is. Of course, then when we ask about its origin, what conditions and causes give rise to it, then we can discuss and explore.
Thank you, Your Holiness. Thank you.
Sean, you're the last one to ask your question.
Your Holiness, I was struck by what you said about secular ethics. And that would presuppose that we would have a set of universal values.
Yes.
So the question is there, what is the way of identifying those universal values? Do we already know them? Or is there a procedure that we would have to use in order to find out what those universal values are?
Universal 수준에 다들 때문에 전주의 티 초과를 때 레다 but the Shamata also to do cover such a
No.
I got it to you. I got to do it. Some of this. Sogja, that level that Chirumusa. That level some possessing any the ability of appreciation. A mosquito appreciation means some water. So that level some possessing that lead to. 자득이 해요. 디샤 차보다. 어쩌자 저 리뷰전 딱 간다. 하고도 미 가서 그게 영성. 또 튼난도 상불지대. 따디 유니버스 밸류.
그래.
아니 따디 최우선의 중앙 말이었어. 저 리뷰 세콜러리.
그래.
맞지?
근데 그런 컨디션이 되려자. 뒤에나 딱 간다. 장막 잡아지고 봐. 근데 그 리스트 업데 단다 여러 말에서 걔도 맵에는 리스트.
다들 여러잖아.
소단한테 속으로서.
참바. 통로 가지고. 다 잡았으면 당 아주 쉬운 시합이나 대화도 된다고 참바. 그것도 된다고 띵지. 참으로 가다 가지고. 된주도 가지고. 따지네 당구를 하셔야 돼. 싸만난다. 뭐가 좀 좀 해봐. 따지 참으로 된주도 가지고.
So, yes, you're right that in order for this secular ethics project to really become viable, the values need to be universal. And His Holiness was saying that to some extent, these will be universal to also animals, not just human beings. But in relation to this, one of the curiosities that His Holiness has and often asks partly as a kind of a jest is, if scientists can figure out up to what point, given that animals have different sizes of brain, up to what point, animals may be capable of showing appreciation of others' affection. His Holiness is quite sure that mosquitoes have no sense of appreciation. As to the question of list, to some extent there is. One would expect, for example, like loving kindness, not just love, but loving kindness in the way in which we understand that is the aspiration for others to be happy. That and compassion, which focuses on others' suffering and sense of caring for that. And then also honesty. Even animals have an ability to appreciate honesty on the part of the owner. So there will be these very universal values which all of us will endorse and admire. And it's not to be, the list should not be developed on the basis of religious faith, but that's why the approach has to be purely non-religious and secular.
So
these values are there. We don't need to actually seek them out. They are there. So what is needed is to appreciate them and to recognize them. And then their value, their importance. Because many people, when the suggestion is made that someone should be compassionate, they immediately think that, oh, this is only relevant for religious people or spiritual people. And if someone gives the advice that one should be honest and sincere, then again one tends to look at it as a religious value, only relevant in the context of a religious practitioner. Because sometimes there is a tendency on the part of a lot of people that when we see someone who is kind of cunning and clever and kind of deceitful succeed in a corrupt mind, then there's a tendency to admire and wanting to follow that example and be successful in those terms. So this kind of pattern seems to be implicit, kind of indirectly teaching these values, these wrong values. So therefore, to counter this, we cannot simply leave the universal values without paying attention. So we need to make a conscious effort to...
I think everybody appreciate all these values, particularly at the time of young age. Then sometimes we take for granted, and these are good. That's all. So my Indian friend, I often was telling them, India, concept of non-violence, through centuries, 1,000 years, there. And people from different religious traditions live together. And from childhood, they take for granted there are different multi-religions there. So that kind of sort of habit from childhood there. But then, usually you say, look, just a
normal thing.
A normal thing. So this is now, it is necessary to educate from
young age.
Young age. Now, in this country, in India, make clear this century-old treasure of India is something very relevant to today's world and can be example to rest of the world. So like that, these basic sort of the universal value, everybody accept these are, I think, when our mind not disturbed, then at that time, I think, everybody, I think, accept these values. Then we grown up. Perhaps we may say, become more wiser. Then all sort of
manipulation,
tricks,
crafty.
How to manipulate, how to exploit. All these things come, and sometimes in society, even I think appreciate someone very capable to cheat other people very smoothly. Then sometimes we admire, right? Like that. And the hero, so-called hero, who have no hesitation to kill millions of people. Sometimes we feel, oh, great hero. Isn't it? That's how I feel. So
it seems that imbuing, taking in that kind of value in the culture seems to be almost like manipulating our thoughts and our mind. So yesterday we saw in the clip that they also, young soldiers, some of them are talking about how pumped up they are. Some individuals, when they are able to inflict pain on someone that they dislike, the more pain they see in the other, it's sort of the greater the sense of satisfaction they derive from this. So that kind of quality, Holiness would argue, that is absent in a young child. So these kind of things, traits, only acquire once our mind has become polluted.
So with this, I think it's the perfect closing remarks to what we have
polluted,
Polluted, concluded.
Conclude.
Conclusion of pollution.
Did I say pollution? No, concluding marks. Polluting marks. And we have had many messengers that have come from their particular field and have been reporting to you over the last 5 days. And I'm sure you have received much new input that you as the messenger will also be able to convey to the rest of the world. And we're all in this basically together. And I would really like to thank you from the depth of my heart for having shared your time with us, and also to have given us the opportunity to interact in this wonderful way. Thank you very much, Your Holiness.
So, perhaps in some of my responses to your questions, I may have spoken a bit too much than I should have, particularly from the Buddhist perspective. So if that has been the case, I would like to apologize.
I don't think that there is such a sense. And I would like to request Adam Engel, the CEO of Mind and Life and also founding member of the Institute to give a few closing remarks. Thank you.
Your Holiness, this has been a wonderful week, a really wonderful week, and it started in that down that path with your audience, with the board on Sunday, where you invited us together to express and welcome us as more than friends, but as true comrades of 22 years. And it really emphasizes the deep and caring connection among us all. And from the very, very beginning, our intention was to establish the Mind and Life effort as a family. And I think that we're doing that. And this deep underlying caring connection is being evident in the work that we've been doing together, over these decades. As I mentioned to Your Holiness, one of our close comrades and friends, Barry Hershey, has not been able to be with us this week. His brother-in-law, sadly, is dying from brain cancer, and he has chosen to stay home. He canceled his trip just at the very, very last minute. He didn't think it was appropriate for him, and he didn't want to be away from his family at this time. But thankfully, his daughter Betsy is with us. In the nature of family, John back here and Cliff have first came here in 1990, and Richie in 1992. And this year, they're here with their families. And as you know, my family has been here several times, and other families have been here. Many in this room have come back for decades, and others are very new. This is their first time, and we welcome them all in that spirit. Yesterday, Your Holiness said that more people on the planet today will listen to scientists in modern society than lamas. And I think back to the year 2000 with our Mind and Life meeting on destructive emotions, when Your Holiness recognized that fact and said to the scientists in the room that it appeared to Your Holiness that Buddhism and other contemplative traditions have developed practices that really are beneficial for cultivating these basic human values. And you asked the scientists in the room to investigate these practices in their laboratories to determine, by their standards, whether they were in fact beneficial. And if so, to teach them in a purely secular environment to benefit humanity. And that has been the major thread of the Mind and Life Institute since that time. This is a huge project because in order for science to develop this kind of convincing certainty, it takes many, many studies over many years, expensive, that have to be corroborated. So it's a long-term project. It's nothing less than a multi-generational research effort. As an example, we all know that John, 30 years ago, developed the MBSR program, and there's been 30 years of investigation on that. And it's been a slow process for that to reach a level at which it is widely accepted. So as we thought more deeply about what was really necessary to create these fields, we realized that we needed two things. We need young scientists, more and more young scientists, to want to do this work and to make their careers in this work. And we need to link these young scientists to adequate governmental funding so that they can have the research going on for the decades that it's going to take. And so we developed a strategy to do this. And our strategy, you know very, very well. the Mind and Life meetings with Your Holiness, some of which happen here, some of which happen overseas. This is our 18th in the 22 years. The Mind and Life publications, both books and electronic publications now. We now have 11 of those out. The Mind and Life Summer Research Institute. We're in our 6th year of that. We've had probably 1,000 students come through, 500 to 1,000 students. The Varela grants that we've established, we've had 50 of those now and over $500,000. And now we have the Mind and Life Education Research Network, phase 1 and 2, to figure out how to bring the benefits of contemplative practice to children earlier in life and throughout life. And this strategy is really being successful. From just a few scientists in 2000 that were doing this work, there are now literally hundreds. And there are a few here today, young scientists, and I thought we could just take a minute or so to let them express to you directly. Over the years I've been telling you about how this strategy is working, about how these young scientists are getting. Now they're in the room, so I thought that rather than me tell you, we could have them just say a word or two. Amishi, would you?
Your Holiness, when we spoke earlier today, we were talking about the benefits that novice monks get from being in a community and the degree of wellness they experience from having a community. And I would say that in my effort to try to understand better the potential benefits of contemplative practices, the kinds of structure that these dialogues with Your Holiness has provided and Mind and Life's effort combined with that have provided me with that community. So I'm a member of the Mind and Life Education Research Network. I've gone to 3 of the summer institutes, and because of that, it's literally changed the way that I'm able to do my job as a professor. I teach a class at the University of Pennsylvania called the Cognitive Neuroscience of Meditation that's offered to undergraduates there. I have received several grants that the focus of which is to understand better the mechanisms by which mindfulness training has benefits. And I would say, but the most profound thing for me has been sort of my day-to-day inquiry into my topic area has been impacted by the kind of exchange that we've been able to have that integrates, doesn't keep the boxes that kind of Western cognitive neuroscience has taught me in my own training, but has allowed me to think about the integration and a different set of potential framework that I can compare to my own training to think in terms of what really might be happening. So I just wanted to thank you personally for your interest in having this exchange with us that has directly impacted what I do every day.
Why don't we have one more from you guys there, quickly. Yeah, yellow.
Thank you. I would want to follow up on what Amishi shared. I'm a clinical researcher and an assistant professor at the University of Colorado, and have been connected with Mind and Life for the last 3 years through the Summer Research Institute, through the actually beginning with the public meeting in Washington. And I would like to express my just tremendous gratitude to you, Your Holiness, and to Mind and Life for creating this kind of context. And I think that we all know here that the science that we're talking about is a very young science. And one of the things that's incredibly important about new areas of scientific discovery is that they're held to the most rigorous standards in their inception. And my experience of Mind and Life has been that it really has created a context for reaching to the highest possible level of excellence and integrity in our work. And the way that it does that, in my experience, has been through three specific ways. And the first is that it provides this kind of context in which people from all areas of academic exploration can come together in dialogue, so that I can collaborate and talk with other clinical researchers and cognitive neuroscientists like Amishi and affective neuroscientists like Richie, and that creates this incredible richness. But in some ways, even more importantly, what we need to ensure that this work continues with integrity is a dialogue between scientists and academics and contemplative experts. And Mind and Life is really unique in the kinds of opportunities that it provides for young researchers to be able to benefit from the extraordinary wealth of knowledge and expertise that all of you have here. So it allows us to sharpen our concepts, our methods, our understanding of our data, and it's a tremendous gift. And just the final thing I would say is that Mind and Life as an organization, in my experience, is one that really embodies, to use the words we talked about today, your teachings on ethical practice, and really bringing those ethical principles into daily life. And what this does for me as a researcher in my every day that I go to work and I work with students and give talks to other researchers and academic audiences is to be able to carry with me the reminder and the inspiration that the ultimate motivation for this work is the alleviation of suffering, and to know that I'm part of a community who's equally motivated and committed to that. So I also want to just say thank you from the bottom of my heart for all that everyone here is doing. So thank you.
And Your Holiness, there are literally hundreds of stories like this, and I just wanted you to hear a couple of them firsthand. In addition to these new young scientists, the number of studies that are being funded are increasing dramatically. The Science for Monks project is moving forward, and we're working to find ways to collaborate more fully with them. The sessions that happen after this at 3:30 have been, some people say they're the best part of what's going on. And we've got those recorded if Your Holiness ever wants to look at those. The Center for Compassion and Altruism Education at Stanford, which Your Holiness has helped generate, is a marvelous step forward, as well as the Center for the Study of the Healthy Mind at the University of Wisconsin. The fact that we are going to launch in Europe next year, and we have our Indian friends here today and tomorrow to help us devise an Indian strategy. So all put in context, it is to develop, this multi-decade investigation by science into, in collaboration with the contemplative practice. And with these successes, there are risks. There are really challenges that we now face that we never faced before. One of them is a challenge of success. Now, it's no longer necessary just to be with Mind and Life in order to do this work. There's a center at Stanford. There's a center in Wisconsin. What does that mean for Mind and Life? Another challenge of success is the fact that more and more scientists are getting involved, but we haven't developed the contemplative side as fully. And we have to figure out a way to do that so that it can be a true collaboration between science and the contemplative world. There are gender challenges. The fact that the monastic community is largely male-dominated and the science world is largely male-dominated. And we're working all the time to try and figure out how to shift that gender balance. Financial challenges. We live in an environment now, we've just had a financial collapse. Will Mind and Life be able to raise the funds going forward? And also transitional challenges. Over the next 10 years, the leadership of Mind and Life, the founding leadership, is going to have to transition to the next generation of leadership. And we have to do that patiently, wisely, and consciously. Your Holiness said yesterday again that our hope for the future is children. And knowing that, we started 3 years ago the Mind and Life Education Research Network, MLearn we call it. We've just finished phase 1, which is a 3-year phase. We're ready to embark on phase 2, which is another 3-year phase. And the launching pad for this will be this meeting that is coming up in October. Educating World Citizens for the 21st Century. Educators, scientists, and contemplatives dialogue on cultivating a healthy mind, brain, and heart. This is a public meeting in October of this year. We have a world-class set of panelists, the same as we've had at MIT and at DC the last time. It's co-sponsored by the graduate schools of education of Harvard and Stanford and Wisconsin and Penn and Virginia. We hope that this meeting will be a catalytic meeting to spur research into this new field of contemplative education. In 2010, we're going to be in Europe with a meeting on altruism and compassion in economic systems. And we're going to be planning for a meeting in Delhi in next year as well. And at this time, Your Holiness, I'd like to ask you whether you would consent to do a public meeting in the future in 2012 in New York City. We think we'll be ready at that point in time to make another large statement. Is that a yes?
Nidong jame jungi lol da nidong Julia na Washington chimbu chogorwa da den nidong jame jungi lol ya nidong jungi lol ya New York ya public meeting choe.
Okay. Thank you. So that's a brief, putting in context what we've been doing for the last 22 years and what we plan to do for the next 22 and beyond. And so now we reach the time when it's going to be time to go. And I want to just express the fact that none of this, Your Holiness, would be possible without you. And we thank you from the bottom of our hearts for this 22 years of comradeship and participation, and for the decades going forward. I'd also like to thank our founding members that are not here, Francisco Varela and Barry Hershey, who we've always considered to be our financial partner from the very beginning, and also our Mind and Life Board, who many of whom are here today, and those that are not here. Of course, I'd like to thank the participants in this meeting. Thank you so much for taking all your time and the pre-meeting and all of the effort that you've put in, to come and participate with us, and we welcome your future involvement in Mind and Life. Of course, our interpreters, without you, we'd all be lost. And two interpreters that are behind the scenes translating for our Geshes here, Dorji Damdol, Geshe Dorji Damdol, and Druk Sering. Thank you so much, wherever you are. Who? Oh, of course. Well, as part of the participants, Alan and David, who organized this, and Alan, who came up with this idea, and then organized it among the participants. It was really, really a wonderful, wonderful job. The Mind and Life staff who are here and also back in Colorado, Diego, Zara, who's been with us for a number of years, Rob and Dave, who are here, and back in Boulder, Kate, Laura, Heather, Angela, Barbara, and Jim. takes a tremendous amount of effort. And also, Your Holiness, the staff of your private office, which has more and more been so involved. Chimala, Tenzin Takla, Tenzin Chodor, Don Eisenberg, and Lakpa, and all the other members of the audiovisual department, the Namgyal Monastery audiovisual archive staff, Jigme and the private office security, and everyone from Namgyal that's been working on this, and from the private office staff.
And we're still missing one person without whom we wouldn't be here. That's Adam Engel. Thank you.
And then Tepa, we had a wonderful performance at Tepa last night. People had a wonderful time over at the Tibetan Children's Village. We've stayed at Choner House, Pematang, and Kashmir Cottage. And finally, I want to welcome and thank Rajiv Malhotra, the Foundation for Universal Responsibility, and our Indian guests who will be joining us for dinner tonight and participating, with us tomorrow to develop an India strategy. Yeah.
I think as a part of formality, the tank, although I already mentioned, the reputation is not necessary. In any way, I think besides a profession with the name of doctor or the professors, like that, on a human level, all, I think, sharing the deeper human value. And also, I think, genuine, warm feeling as a friend, as a comrade. These not necessarily come from professional level, right? This come from human level. I always see cherish these basic human level qualities, good quality, that I feel very important. And there is much greater possibility to increase these things. So, I appreciate. Then, of course, all the participants, I think when I saw yesterday, the explanation with pictures, these things, naturally, I think you spent some time for preparation or homework. I appreciate. I appreciate that. Then, of course, translators, all these things, of course, very important. Yes, of course, our long-time friend, very much appreciate. Supposed to be successor. Successor.
We have one bold man succeeding another bold man.
Then I think special thank is to our translator. I think every day, I think 4 hours, almost like prison. So
they're sitting inside the booth and translating for the Tibetans.
So I very much appreciate. Then I'm looking forward to our next meeting. That's all. Thank you.